2024. Are we live? Are we live? I think we're live. Hello, everybody. Oh, excuse me. You might hear cars going past, or you might... It is very hot still in the country of the UK, which is slightly peculiar as it's not really the sunniest day, but it is still quite hot and muggy. So I'm going to try and power through this and waffle through this podcast, because I just, the last few days I've just been really wanting to chat and waffle about F1, and I just, you know, I've had an itch to be doing it. I mean, when I've had, when we've done podcasts before or spoken about F1, I have had other people to have. No, wait, I'll be having. I'm kind of waffling on. I'm getting up my phone because there's a list of things that I wanted to talk about on this podcast. And it's going to be about the current season, the 2024 Formula One season. And there's a few things I wanted to talk about, so I'm trying to sort out a list, but at the same time I also introduced this podcast because it's a solo. It's just me talking to an audience that isn't even here yet, or might not ever show up, and I would usually have co-hosts for this thing, and we would talk about F1. We've spoken about Lewis Hamilton, and, you know, we've been ranking his cars in terms of their performance relative to the field, and how good they were, and blah 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 blah. We've spoken about Romain Grosjean and how his career went, and how he could have had 3 race wins in 2012. We've spoken about numerous things. We've done our own calendars. We made our dream ideal calendars. That was a thing, and that got pretty spicy when talking about certain tracks. Baku specifically. I don't understand how Baku's on the calendar. It's well, I do, because money and recency bias, but it's not a good track, and I stand by that. But anyway, I wanted to talk about the 2024 season because it's getting a bit interesting. You know, the last couple of months, it started off extremely mid. Verstappen took pole in Bahrain, fucked off up the road, won by 22 seconds. He won again from pole in Jeddah. He had a mechanical failure in Australia, so it gave everyone hope, but the race was mid in Australia anyway. Then he went back to winning ways in China, and then in Japan, and then he won in China. He didn't win. Oh, he won the sprint as well. Didn't start on pole for the sprint, but he started on pole for the race, and he won both in convincing fashion. The point is, Verstappen was cooking. He won 4 of the first 5 races. He won the sprint. The season was pretty much over in terms of a championship fight, but the season hotted up after Miami. So this is just me rambling into the void, wanting to talk about the season. And as I've mentioned him, we might as well talk about Max Verstappen's performances this season. Now, there's this little thing at F1 called the power rankings. Now, they're pretty much dished out the day or a day after of the race. Like driver ratings for their performances across the entire weekend, but obviously predominantly the race / sprint race if there is one. And I kind of feel for Max in a way, because he's been given, for example, let me go through this. In Bahrain, Jeddah, Japan and China, he was given 9.6s in all of them. He won the races. He got fastest lap in most. I'm not sure if he got the fastest lap in Jeddah, or it was either Jeddah or China. No, Jeddah or Japan, or even China. One of the races he didn't get the fastest lap, I think. But you know, he's won all the races. He started from pole. He's been faultless in all of those 4 races, and he's been given a 9.6. I'm not really sure how you can dish out those kind of results. Like a 9.6 is not a bad rating across. If you're hitting 9.6s consistently across multiple race weekends, especially like, obviously there was a blip in Australia where he didn't get that, but that's 4 of the first 5 races he's getting 9.6 ratings. That's very impressive. But I don't understand how he's not getting 10s in some of them. Like Bahrain, he was completely faultless. I mean, he was faultless in all of them, but Bahrain was a perfect start. pole position. I believe he led every lap. I'm not sure if he pitted and he lost the lead at one point. You know where they do pit stops and like you technically don't lead every lap because someone's crossed the line while you've been in the pits and you've not been leading the race, blah blah blah. It was a dominant performance. He won by 22 seconds with Perez in second place in the same car, not anywhere near him. You give that guy a 9.6. I don't understand what Verstappen could have done to deserve a 10 in that race. Like, I don't understand how he didn't get a 10, is what I'm trying to say. How he's not got a 10 in that race is a joke. The same with Jeddah as well. I don't think he won by as big of a margin, but again, he walked the field. He drove perfectly. Japan drove perfectly. China in the race, he drove perfectly. In the sprint qualifying, he didn't start on pole. That was where it was wet, and then for the sprint, obviously he didn't start on pole. I think he started third, and then he made up places, and then he got past Lewis Hamilton lap. It was quite early on, lap maybe 7, 8, 9, I think. It was just before the halfway point. He took the lead of Lewis Hamilton going into the turn 14 hairpin. He took the lead. He didn't lead every lap in the sprint, but he dominated the race. You give him a 9.6. Okay, fair enough. It wasn't complete domination for Max that weekend, even though he scored maximum points, I believe, on that weekend. He didn't lead every lap, so it wasn't perfect. So I can understand that you wouldn't give him a 10, perhaps. But still, I don't understand why it's constantly a 9.6. Have they just given up rating Max, really? Do they just sack it off and be like, alright, we can't have this guy be 10 out of 10 every single weekend, so we've got to put like a rating cap on him, or like a threshold where he can't pass unless he's gone from like last to first in like an incredible drive. Then we'll give him a 10 out of 10. Because I'll tell you one thing, in China, as Rocket Powered Mohawk would say, Lando Norris in the power rankings had a better score, I believe. I believe he had a 9.7 and 9.8? Let me have a look at this. F1 power rankings. Let's Google the official F1 website for the power rankings. The power rankings for the Chinese Grand Prix. Let's have a look. For China. Here we go. Power rankings. Lando Norris got a 9.8. He finished second in the race. He started on pole for the sprint race, but then immediately dropped down the grid. I remember at turn 1 and 2, Lewis took the lead. Lando went off the track. He didn't even finish second. I'm not even sure. Did he finish third in the sprint? I don't think he did. I think Perez finished third. So he went from being on pole for the sprint to falling back down the order, not getting a top 3. He finished second in the race after starting fourth, I believe. Yes, he started fourth, finished second in the race, and got a rating of 9.8. I don't know if you can rate Lando's weekend better than Max's, because Max, he settled, it says here, Verstappen had to settle for P4 in a dramatic sprint qualifying session, but the reigning world champion bounced back immediately by recovering to victory in the sprint, bagging pole position in the Grand Prix, for the Grand Prix, and then dominating Sunday's encounter, despite a host of incidents, safety cars and restarts threatening to derail his efforts. So he got a 9.6, Max did, and got outdone in a power ranking by Lando Norris, who had a significantly worse weekend. Yes, at this point in the season, Verstappen had the best car by a fair bit, it must be said. It was still quite clear of everyone else in terms of overall performance, but I just it doesn't seem right that Max has not got a 10 for any of those 4 wins, any of those 4 races that I've just mentioned. And it kind of feels to me like, he is getting done dirty by all these things. That he has driven some very, very impressive races, and I've already spoken about those first 4 or 5 races of the season. But in Miami, he was driving very well. McLaren had got the upgraded package. Norris's McLaren got the full upgrades. I think Piastri only had half. So at that point, I think is really the real shift in when Red Bull had gone from having by a margin the best car to then being on terms, if not even being slightly worse off than the fully upgraded McLaren. Because up until the safety car came out, Piastri was maintaining the gap to Verstappen at about 3 seconds, 2 to 3 seconds, maybe a bit over. Like that was tended to be the range in which they were separated at, which is quite impressive. And then, you know, everyone stops. Lando goes long. The safety car comes out. Lando leads the race after the safety car restart, and you know, with that package, he just pulls away, and Max is not able to keep up. You know, at that point, there's a real shift. That was a great race from Verstappen as well. He did nothing wrong. He just got caught out by the safety car. And what was his rating for the Miami Grand Prix? Because I'm genuinely curious. What was his rating for the Miami Grand Prix? If he's not in the top 2. So Lando got a 9.4. Oscar got an 8.4. Tsunoda got an 8.4. Max got an 8 out of 10. Only 0.2 better than Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton, and only 0.4 better than Esteban Ocon. I just don't agree. Right, I'm gonna check one more, because I'd argue Imola may be Max's best win this season. As in, he was under pressure, he didn't have the fastest car, and he managed to fend off from Lando Norris by maintaining a solid gap. So if he is not number 1... Okay, so Lando and Max both got 9.2s in Imola. Interesting. Considering how much quicker the McLaren has gotten, especially over those races, as I've just mentioned, having Max not... I can't believe... I don't think Max has a single 10 out of 10 this season. The only other race where I think you could probably give Max a 10 out of 10, or 2 races, are Belgium and Silverstone. What did he get in Silverstone? He got an 8.6 in Silverstone. In fairness, the car was off the pace. And who got a better result? Hamilton, obviously. I think Hamilton drove an incredible race. And people say it was gifted to him, like, piss off. Everyone else was making mistakes. He made, I think, one mistake. He went off the track at turn 1, but then so did Russell, and so did Piastri on that very same lap. Every driver made mistakes that race. Or I think Verstappen was actually one of the few people that didn't actually have a moment where he went off the track, I think. But anyway, that's not the point. Lewis drove a great race, deserved a high rating. He got a 9.4. Hulkenberg dragging that tractor of a Haas to P6, I believe it was. I think that was his second P6 in a row, bagging the big boy points for a team that shouldn't even be in the points, is pretty fucking impressive. And he got a 9.2, fair play. Verstappen got an 8.6. I think you could push that to a 9. And look, I'm not a fanboy of any driver. Obviously, I have drivers that I prefer. Of course I do. Lewis Hamilton being one of my guys, Charles Leclerc being one of my guys, Piastri is one of my guys. But like, I hate the fact that just because a driver is dominant, like you've seen it with Schumacher and Vettel and Hamilton, and now with Verstappen, whenever they're not having a car that can really just cruise to victory, and they're having to really work for it, or they don't have the best car outright and they're not having the car underneath them to challenge for wins, but are still having to put up good performances to get the results. I hate the fact that everyone is just kind of just laughing, and obviously it is such a relief when like different people like that it's not the same person all the time. Like over the last 4 races, Verstappen's not won a single race. You would not have expected that last season, and you definitely wouldn't have expected it at the start of this season. But here we are. That aspect I do like, but at the same time, it shouldn't be your opportunity to beat down on a driver because they're not doing as well in terms of their results because of, you know, whether it is the car or their performances. You can't use this opportunity to slander Max and say he's a car merchant, this, that and the other. He's not. He's a world-class talent. He's one of the best drivers of this, well, definitely of this millennium. Definitely, in my opinion, I think he's one of the greats. I think you could probably put him in a top 10 list of all time, and he's there. That's controversial to a lot of people, but I think Max is that fucking good. He's got areas he needs to sort out, whether that be his temperament or incidents on track. Like, every driver has them, yes, but that doesn't vindicate some of his bad behaviour. But he is one of the best. And I think with being one of the best, you are also one of the very first people in the firing line for all the haters online and all the people and all the toxic fans that want to slander drivers whenever they don't have a good race. Shut the fuck up. He's one of the best ever. So respect him. Simple as that. So yeah, that ranking in Silverstone. Back to what I was talking about. The ranking. An 8.6 in Silverstone after a fine drive probably shouldn't have been on the podium, considering that on that weekend he had the third best car. I think it was predominantly down to the conditions and like the temperatures and the fact that the rain came in and all that sort of stuff. It allowed, obviously McLaren would naturally have been the best car for at least 6 or 7 races in a row now, so Red Bull naturally at best can be the second best car unless they get fat upgrades. But that weekend the Mercedes was better, and I think that was mainly down due to the conditions and whatnot as well. And yes, they did get a 1-2 in qualifying. I think the Mercedes car is still temperamental, but it's been improved a lot. And on that weekend, it was definitely better than the Red Bull. So that weekend, Red Bull had the third best car, and Verstappen put it in P2 after a fine drive and finished 1.4 seconds off the winner. After being, I mean, he was under threat from Sainz battling for 5th place before the rain came, and he was closer to winning the race than he was the entire race. So, fair play to him. And then, we're not going to talk about Hungary, because I don't want to beat down on Verstappen, because I don't need to be that. The race was horrendous from him, and I suppose if we look at the power rankings, let's have a look at what rating they gave him for this race. I assume they've given him a 2, considering F1 just choose to hate on this guy. No, he's not even in the he's not even in the top 10. He's not in the top 10. Stroll is in the top 10. Ricciardo is in the top 10. Hülkenberg, Russell is in there. Albon. Yeah. So there is no Max Verstappen in the power rankings for Hungary. Belgium, however, I think is arguably the most egregious. So, I think let's talk about the Belgian Grand Prix quickly. Let me just give you context. So, he qualifies. He is the fastest driver in qualifying. He takes a grid penalty. I believe this is for engine components. He takes a grid penalty. He starts from 11th. In the opening stages of the race, he climbs up the field. I believe he gets to, is it P6? Because I believe it's P6 he gets to. Perez has issues, so he falls back down the field. And I'm not just talking about the car issues. I think he himself has a couple of driver issues. But his car was not working properly that day. And Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari and Red Bull are quite far clear of every other car. So all of those drivers who race for those teams should be finishing in the top 8. And they did, provisionally, before the disqualification. I believe Perez still finished 8th, and then he got 7th. Provisionally, all those 4 drivers should have been finishing in the top 8, and they did. Okay, so Verstappen should have got past all those cars. He did. He provisionally, if I am correct, he finished P5. He finished behind Charles Leclerc. Yeah, I think he was in DRS as well. He was fending off from Lando Norris, he did a good job fending off Lando, and was on the gearbox of Charles Leclerc, who at one point was in the fight for the win. In fact, you could argue that any of the top 8 could have won that race. And if you were going to pick a driver that could have won that race, I think it was initially the top 3 who did finish on the podium. In the first stage, it really looked like it was a fight between Lewis, Leclerc and Piastri for the win. Then it kind of swapped and changed because Sainz was going on to a different strategy, so maybe Sainz is in this race. Then, after the round of pit stops, it's between Hamilton, Leclerc and Piastri again. Then Russell does the one stop, Leclerc kind of falls back, Piastri's faster than him, he went a bit long on his tyres and he was catching the Mercedes. Hamilton was catching Russell, and they finished 1-2 with Russell winning, Hamilton second, Piastri third, and all that bollocks. Then Russell got disqualified, and rightly so, because his car was underweight. Fight me, his car was underweight. He deserved to be disqualified. It's not George's fault, it's the team's fault, and it is kind of peak for George. But at the same time, if your car is, even if it is 0.1 kg underweight, it's underweight. You need to be disqualified. It would have been wrong for them to have not disqualified him. Disqualifying Russell was the only thing that they could have done. And it's a shame for him, but that's how it goes. So he was disqualified. And Max ended up being promoted to 4th because of it. Obviously, everyone got moved up the grid, obviously. But Max finished 4th in that race. And he started from P11. If we look at his race, he gets past the cars he should have done. He beats his teammate, and yes, his teammate had car issues, but his teammate also has skill issues, so he fell back behind it. He gets in front of Lando Norris. I don't believe it was an overtake. I believe it was actually more of a strategic call. They got the strategy right with Verstappen to get him in front of Norris, which actually helps him extend his championship lead to Lando Norris. He finishes just behind Charles Leclerc, who at one point was actually in a position to fight for the win. And he gets 12 solid points. And he gets a rating of 8.6? No, not even 8. He got a 7.4. He got a 7. Russell, in contrast, got disqualified and got an 8.6. Yes, his drive was very good, but without any context of the race, if you were to look at these rankings and these rankings alone and see that George Russell was disqualified from the race and Verstappen had gone from 11th to 4th, and that Russell had got a driver rating from that race 1.2 points higher, you wonder what the fuck Max did wrong that race. Max did nothing wrong. Had he been leading the race, he would have had the car to win. Because you have to think, the clean air, it would have been worked well. And, the Red Bull was good, and you have to counter that, like, everyone's running these fucking low wings. So the drag is significantly reduced, so the DRS is less effective. It really took Piastri a lot of hard work to get past Leclerc. And I know it only took 2 laps, but had he not done that, he would have been stuck behind him for a long, long time. The DRS isn't as effective at Spa when everyone's running these low fucking wings. He made it to 4th position. He got past Lando Norris, he got past his teammate, he inherited a position because George Russell got disqualified, and he beat Carlos Sainz as well. He made 6 on-track positions and then 7 by the end of obviously after the race when George got disqualified, and he got a 7.4. I really, really don't think that rating. I think that rating is absolutely outrageous. I thought it was an 8.6, but I was looking at Piastri and Russell. That's insane. That is actually criminal. I think that is criminal. And if I was a Verstappen fan looking at that, I'd be livid. I would be livid if a driver, especially if it was a driver I outright supported, did a brilliant drive, made up loads of positions, and got it was an egregious rating. I don't understand how they've done him so dirty like that. It's actually insane how they've done Verstappen like that. Anyway, that is a gripe with some of the power rankings, and actually me feeling bad for Max that he's getting done dirty. And now for a little bit of a season review for him. If I were to give him a rating for the first half of the season, I'm going to take into account his good and bad performances. I think not necessarily his attitude over the radio, and yes, that does need to be fixed, but it's not actual, that's not his racing, that's his attitude. It's different. And yes, those two things can overlap. The incident in Hungary and the incident in Austria do slightly taint things because, I mean, they weren't great and were easily avoidable. But as a whole, for this season, I think so far Max Verstappen is a solid 9. I'm not going to do decimal places. He's not been 10 out of 10. He's not been perfect. Yes, he's not had the best car for every single race, but even when he hasn't had the best car, he's driven some very impressive races. Max Verstappen gets a solid, unquestionable 9 out of 10. Any lower than 9, if you're giving Max Verstappen an 8, I think there is a debate to be had, but anything lower than an 8 is outrageous, I think. I'm sticking with a 9 out of 10 for Max Verstappen. And let's go on to his main, and well, I say his main, his closest championship rival, Lando Norris, who is quite far behind at this point. Granted, you know, his car at the start of the season was a little bit off the pace of the Ferraris, and the Ferraris were significantly slower than the Red Bulls. Lando has had a good season. Yes, McLaren have made mistakes. God damn it. Lando too has made mistakes. As I mentioned, the China sprint race. He went to Malaysia at turn 1. He went so far wide, it was unreal. And then, I mean, he made up for it in the main race. That's where the main amount of points get scored. But still, the sprint is an opportunity to score points, and he went wide, he fucked it up, and lost the sprint race. Then, in the main race, he made it all up. Bahrain, Jeddah, he got beaten by Oliver Behrman, who had barely even had an hour's worth of practice, and you know, considering the fact on the Friday, I believe he put his car on pole in the F2 race and was then thrown into F1 on the Saturday. Oliver Behrman beating Lando Norris after starting, was it 10th or 9th? Pretty damn impressive, you know. No, I think he was even 11th. I don't even know if he made it into Q3. The point is, he got beaten by a rookie in their first race. Granted, yes, the rookie was in the Ferrari, but still, he's a rookie. You've had 5 full seasons in Formula 1. Your car isn't that far off the pace of the Ferrari, and you were beaten by the rookie. You know, not the best place in the world. But let's get on to his better results of the season. Obviously, in Miami, he won, and I spoke about this the other day, but and that's another thing as well. I did a live stream the other day at like 1 o'clock in the morning, and halfway through it cut out. So there's like, I think it's like 30 or 40 or 50 minute podcast or like ranting session, and it was actually an hour and a half. I was still speaking till about 20 past 2 in the morning, and not all of it was caught on the video, which is annoying as fuck. But I did speak about Miami, and in Miami, he wasn't driving a bad race. Obviously, in the sprint, he got taken out of the sprint, and it wasn't his fault. You know, there was an incident with Fernando, Lewis, Stroll, and Lando kind of was just like, he suffered the consequences of that incident. But in the race, he qualifies fairly mid, to be honest, considering the upgrades. And, I mean, he stuck behind Sergio Perez for a long period of time. He couldn't get past Sergio Perez. Max was leading the race. Piastri was running in second. And then, you know, I think Lando was running down in 6th at this point. Then the pit stops came, and he decided to go long to use his tyres and the pace the car had to try and maybe do an overcut. And then he benefited from the safety car. The safety car put him in the lead, and then he just kind of drove away and won the race. Now, obviously winning your first race is a great thing, and even though it was slightly annoying that his first win was gifted by the safety car, it is still, you know, it's a cool moment for him. But it must be taken in, everything must have context. You must give everything context to get a wider picture. And the wider picture is, yes, he did win his first race, and yes, his first race win was, you know, he deserved to have won a race. Well, that's slightly contentious. The point I'm trying to make is, he won his first race, but it's not as an amazing thing as a lot of fans thought it was, because it was just kind of handed to him because of the safety car. Otherwise, Max Verstappen probably would have won the race. So that was a thing. And, you know, Imola, he drives a very good race, can't get past Max Verstappen. It wasn't able to close the gap down enough. He might have had an attack if there were 1-2 laps to go, but the fact is, there was a set amount of laps for each Grand Prix, and he failed to catch up. That's the end of the story. But he drove a good race. Then, in Monaco, I mean, there's not much to do in Monaco. I mean, you kind of get stuck where you are. Spain and Canada, 2 races he should have won, and he failed to win them. It's he drove fine in both of those races, but mistakes and strategy, you kind of just think he should have won those races. Austria, I'm going to talk about now. That incident, the incident that gave them both punches. Yes, you could. If you're going to blame a driver, you're going to blame Max for it. However, Lando could have avoided it. Now, Lando could have. He wasn't on the curbs, and people use that as an. Oh, wait a second. Is my live stream going to cut out? Hold on a minute. Hold on. We're still connecting to the servers. I'm just going to end the live stream. If you're still watching,